Christmas. What a great time of year. The lights, the sounds, the traditions. I have a Christmas tradition of my own. You see, every year I make myself a nice cup of coffee and go wrap presents. And while I wrap presents, I watch a movie. The greatest Christmas movie of all time. Die Hard. What's that? It is a Christmas movie, and don't you ever laugh at me. Oh, biscuits and gravy. Nothing quite as nice as making fists with your toes. Ooh! That's better. Now, I know a lot of people have talked about the NES Die Hard game, but there's been some newer Die Hard games too, so why don't we talk about some of them? Why don't we start with a port of the Die Hard arcade game? Yeah, there was an arcade game. Any of you guys remember the arcades? That's great. I sure do miss arcades. In 1997, Sega released Dynamite Deca. I know, I'm supposed to be talking about Die Hard, but if you'll give me a second, I can explain that. Dynamite Deca follows Bruno Dillinger as he fights his way through an entire army of terrorists trying to save the president's daughter. Where does the Die Hard tie-in come from? Well, you see, Sega owned the rights to the Die Hard game, so they renamed Bruno John McClane and slapped the Die Hard name on it, and boom, shipped it out to the US. Technically, this isn't a Die Hard game at all. But that doesn't mean it's a bad game. Die Hard Arcade is essentially a 3D Streets of Rage clone, which means awesome beat-em-up action. And if that doesn't give you Christmas cheer, I don't know what will. You'll stroll through level after level, crushing bad guys and button mashing your way through with whatever weapon you may have come across. You may have found a gun. In that case, you need to keep an eye on your ammo. But if you're really lucky, you may have found a broom. From time to time, the game will throw QuickTime events your way. If you successfully complete this event, you'll get to bypass an entire fight sequence, which I think is a pretty cool way to incorporate a shortcut. The only other thing to mention about this game is the graphics and sound. At the time, the graphics were above average, but by today's standards, they're going to come across a little blocky. That since the game is essentially arcade perfect, I'll also throw some pretty nice bonus points in there because of the awesome explosions. Sound is nice as well. The sound effects are pretty standard arcade fare, but the soundtrack? It is excellent. The disc-based system really helps the soundtrack shine. If you decide to play through in 2-player mode, make sure you play all the way to the end. The game throws a nice little twist at the end. Overall, Die Hard Arcade is an excellent game, even though it's technically not a Die Hard game. I think I need more coffee. Totally worth it. Let's talk about the Die Hard games released for the PlayStation. Oh! Let's start with Die Hard Trilogy. Die Hard Trilogy actually follows the Die Hard storyline. It covers the action of the first 3 movies. Not only that, it presents itself in the form of 3 genres of game. Die Hard uses a third-person shooter presentation. The graphics are blocky, but what 3D game wasn't back then? Even though the graphics are low resolution, it does have a little bit more polish than Die Hard Arcade. I like the sound, but once again, the sound effects seem pretty standard. There's nothing particularly mind-blowing about the audio. I really think the game shines when it comes to gameplay. Unlike most shooters, you can't just stroll in under a hail of gunfire. You actually have to have some stealthy skills, which is nice. I think it helps pace the game out. This game is really a precursor to the original Siphon Filter. Once you finish Die Hard, you can move on to Die Hard 2, Die Harder. You're going to find yourself playing an on-rail shooter. For this, you better be packing some heat. You're going to find yourself exploring the Dulles Airport. Graphics and audio are pretty standard, and what can you say about gameplay of a light gun game? You point, you shoot. Just make sure you're always paying attention. The level design is the shining element here. You really feel like you've been teleported to the Dulles Airport. Well, as teleported as polygon graphics will let you be. The third game is Die Hard with a Vengeance. This game recreates some of the best chase scenes from the third movie. You're going to drive around a digital version of New York City disarming bombs. You get to do it in a number of different vehicles, including a dump truck. The driving elements in this game are great. The controls are perfect. You're going to be able to pull off moves that's going to make you feel like a stunt driver. But I think my favorite aspect of this game is the audio. It's full of some of John's best quotes, including... Doesn't get much more Die Hard than that, folks. It feels so much better. Anyway, there was a sequel to the Die Hard Trilogy game. They came out with one called Die Hard Trilogy 2, Viva Las Vegas. This time, John McClane must face yet another terrorist group in the heart of Sin City. Wait, another terrorist group? It's Die Hard. I can go with it. Unfortunately, this game isn't nearly as good as the first. It follows the same recipe as the first game, except it doesn't have the benefit of the movies as a backdrop. Once again, you're going to begin with a third-person action game. This game pretty much looks exactly the same as the original, except it was built on the Duke Nukem engine, so that changes things very slightly, and they also lowered the camera angle. The gameplay seems dumbed down a bit. You don't need to be nearly as stealthy, which wasn't as fun to me. Just like before, you're going to move on to a light gun game. It was almost exactly like the first game, except for this time it just seems to lack some sort of refinement that the original did. Truthfully, I don't like this. You're also going to face some frustration based on the gun you're using. If you're using a gun con, you may have a few accuracy issues. That's about enough of that. Let's go ahead and look at the last game and get this over with. The game closes out with a driving stage. In this game, you drive around town, crashing into enemy cars and driving over bombs. Not that far removed from the original game. This time, the game lacks the controls of the original. You won't be able to drive nearly as fast as you did in the other. Truthfully, the lack of controls and the ho-hum, been there, done that vibe of this game is really disappointing. Honestly, I'd avoid it. The last game I wanted to talk about was Die Hard Vendetta for the GameCube. So far, the only 2 games we've talked about that have been worth our time has been Die Hard Trilogy and Die Hard Arcade. You'd think given the basic construct of a movie like Die Hard, it would translate well into a game. Personally, I would expect a first-person shooter based on Die Hard to be great. Well, great is a strong word in this case. I love the fact that they finally made a game that allows you to see the world through John's eyes. This game takes place several years in the future, and Lucy has joined the police force, and somehow, someway, she's been kidnapped by some terrorists.
Looking for my daughter?
Lucy's here?
Yes, sir. It was her first assignment. It seems she surprised the robbers.
John, we've not heard...
I guess we can all tell that this game is non-canonical from the movies, especially since Live Free or Die Hard painted a very different picture for the future of the McClane family. They tossed some nice elements into this one. Multi-outcome hostage situations, level puzzles, and some, well, non-playable character interactions that sometimes seem helpful. They even peppered in some Max Payne vibes. If you manage to squeeze off a headshot, the game will reward you with a killer bullet time sequence. And if the action gets too heavy for you, you can activate Hero Time, which is essentially a bullet time effect as well. These were all great attempts at making something unique, but truthfully, the game lacks in a lot of basic expectations. The frame rate of the game is spotty at best. 1 second, you find yourself smooth sailing, well, as long as there's no action on the screen, but the second you find yourself in a firefight, well, the best I can tell you is good luck. Level design is fairly bad. Some levels come across as a mishmash maze experience. Other graphical elements just come off as boring. The models in the game are decent enough, but nothing ever really pops. The controls, on the other hand, drive me absolutely crazy. Aiming is awful. It gets really jerky when you're trying to hone in on enemy. So why bother? The game's auto-aim feature is enabled by default, so you're really better off using an assault rifle than trying to hone in on an enemy with a sniper rifle. It really removes what little challenge the game offers. I think boring pretty much sums this one up. I realize I said Die Hard Vendetta was the last game I wanted to mention, but there's also one more first-person shooter. It's Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza. This game is essentially based on the first movie. I think it's a pretty good game and the graphics are okay, but the problem with it is you're going to have a hard time finding a computer that'll run it. You're going to have a hard time because you need to find a pretty old computer to do it. The best I can say is good luck, and if you can find something to play it on, it's definitely worth a look. That pretty much sums up my look at Die Hard games for this Christmas season. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and whatever you do and however you celebrate, make sure you celebrate safely.